Hey everyone, welcome to this explainer. Today we are diving into the incredible 2,000-year history of a city that constantly builds itself up, faces total destruction, and then stubbornly rises right back from the ashes. We aren't just memorizing dates and facts today. We're uncovering the very soul of a place that has relentlessly shaped global culture, politics, and human ambition. There's a famous quote that I think perfectly sets the stage for our journey. Centuries of ambition carved into narrow streets, kings build it, revolutionaries tear it apart. It hits the nail on the head, doesn't it? It captures this relentless phoenix cycle of survival, elegance, and violent rebirth. Artists remake it, and through it all, these fiercely proud citizens just keep pushing history forward.
Okay, here is our roadmap. We've got 5 main eras to cover today: the mud and the miracle, monuments and mortality, elegance and the guillotine, empires and barricades, and finally, modernity, tragedy, and resilience. Let's jump right in.
Part 1. The Mud and the Miracle.
So, we usually think of Paris as this glittering city of light, right? Well, back in 259 BC, it was basically just a collection of mud huts. A Celtic tribe called the Parisii, which literally means boat people, settled on a small muddy island in the Seine River. They weren't building grand monuments, they were just trying to survive by controlling a river crossing. But then, in 52 BC, Julius Caesar's army shows up, burns the whole thing down, and rebuilds it with that trademark Roman efficiency. They called it Lutetia, which literally translates to marshy place. The Romans brought huge amphitheaters, bathhouses, and aqueducts to this little marshy place. But as we know, the empire eventually collapsed, forcing the frightened locals to abandon those nice Roman comforts and retreat back to the safety of their fortified island.
7,000. That is the staggering number of pounds of silver early Paris had to scrounge up just to pay off Viking raiders in 845 AD. It was straight-up extortion. It really proves that early Paris was defined almost entirely by this desperate scratching and clawing fight just to exist. They learned a very hard lesson. If you want to keep breathing, you better build stronger walls.
Section 2. Monuments and Mortality.
Fast forward to the 12th and 16th centuries, and Paris finally transitions from a grim fortress into a city of undeniable ambition. But, as they were about to find out, tremendous wealth quickly makes you a massive target. The juxtaposition in this era is just wild. On one hand, you have massive ambition. They're engineering the gravity-defying flying buttresses of Notre-Dame, founding the University of Paris, and the population explodes to 200,000. But at the exact same time, the 1348 Black Death and the horrific 100 Years' War are wiping out up to half the population. Imagine living through that, watching the greatest cathedral in the world rise up while your entire neighborhood falls to the plague. Unbelievable.
And the bloodshed definitely didn't stop with war and plague. It morphed into extreme religious violence during the 16th century between Catholics and Protestant Huguenots. To finally end decades of horrific slaughter, the Protestant King Henry IV actually converted to Catholicism just to secure the throne. He uttered this legendary, incredibly pragmatic phrase, "Paris is well worth a mass." He entered the city in 1594, ending the chaos and kicking off an era of absolute monarchy that would change the face of France forever.
Section 3. Elegance and the Guillotine.
By the 17th and 18th centuries, Paris is the undisputed heavyweight center of European grandeur and Enlightenment thinking. But beneath that beautiful surface, the tension between extreme wealth and extreme poverty was a powder keg waiting to explode. The stark divide here is incredible. You have the world of the aristocracy, right? The Sun King, Louis XIV, makes the monarchy an art form and eventually moves his entire court out to Versailles because he literally doesn't trust the Parisian mobs. You have philosophers debating human rights in elegant salons, but the reality for everyday Parisians? Completely different. Over 600,000 citizens were packed into filthy, overcrowded streets with medieval sanitation, facing skyrocketing bread prices and literal starvation.
To give you an idea of just how bad the urban decay was getting by the end of the 18th century, consider this grim question. How do you solve an overflowing cemetery that's actively making the city sick? By the 1780s, the graveyards were so overstuffed that shallow graves were poisoning the air, making nearby residents violently ill. So the city had to pull off a massive, incredibly macabre engineering project. 6 million bodies. That's how many bodies were quietly dug up and moved down into ancient limestone quarry tunnels beneath the city. This is what created the famous catacombs, miles of underground passages completely lined with skulls and femurs. And all this is happening right beneath the streets, exactly as the French public above ground was reaching its absolute breaking point with the monarchy's lavish spending. That breaking point finally arrives in 1789 with the storming of the Bastille. But the crucial takeaway here is that the revolution didn't just end the monarchy and wrap up neatly, it unleashed a terrifying decade of pure chaos. In 1793, King Louis XVI is executed by the guillotine, which becomes the bloody mechanical symbol of the era. By 1794, during the Reign of Terror, tens of thousands are executed. The revolution quite literally devoured its own citizens, and the streets of Paris ran with blood.
Section 4. Empires and Barricades. Totally exhausted and traumatized by the terror, Paris limps into the 19th century desperate for stability. We see the meteoric rise of Napoleon's empire. But that fierce Parisian instinct to rebel? Oh, it was far from over. Generation after generation, Parisians continually threw up barricades in the streets. You've got the July Revolution in 1830, two more massive uprisings in 1848, a coup by Napoleon's nephew in 1851, and the Paris Commune in 1871. Parisians were fighting incredibly bloody street battles to overthrow kings, republics, and emperors alike. It just didn't stop.
To put an end to this endless cycle of street warfare, Emperor Napoleon III brought in Baron Haussmann to radically redesign the city. Medieval Paris had been full of these narrow, winding streets that were super easy for citizens to block off with barricades. Haussmann bulldozed them and replaced them with the wide, uniform boulevards and iconic apartment facades we know today. But here's the kicker. While it created a beautiful, modernized city, those wide boulevards were intentionally designed with a very specific ulterior motive. They were meant to prevent citizens from building barricades, making it incredibly easy for military troops to march straight through and control the mobs. Beauty and authoritarianism literally paved into the streets. But the violence still wasn't over. In 1870, a disastrous war with Prussia led to a devastating siege where starving Parisians were reduced to eating rats, cats, and even animals from the zoo. Yeah, really. Following that humiliating defeat, radical workers formed the revolutionary Paris Commune. It lasted only 2 months and ended in what is brutally known as Bloody Week. Government forces killed between 10 and 20,000 communards in one of the deadliest urban battles in history. Retreating rebels even burned public buildings to the ground, leaving the city deeply, deeply traumatized once again.
Our final section, modernity, tragedy, and resilience.
Out of all that 19th century ash comes the Belle Époque, a true golden age of culture, before the profound darkness of the 20th century. By 1914, World War I begins. Now, I absolutely love this story because it shows the sheer resourcefulness of the city. With German forces just 30 miles away, everyday regular Parisian taxis were famously commandeered to rush French troops to the front lines. The taxis of the Marne literally drove their city to safety as the war threatened to destroy everything.
While Paris survived the First World War, the Second World War brought a much darker fate. In 1940, Paris was occupied by Nazi Germany. The swastika actually flew over the Eiffel Tower. Tragically, during this horrific occupation, over 13,000 Jewish Parisians were arrested in the Velbehive Roundup in July 1942 and sent to concentration camps. It is a profound, deep scar on the city's soul. Yet, resistance persisted in the shadows, eventually culminating in a fierce civilian uprising that helped liberate the city in August 1944.
After the war, Paris had to rebuild its spirit and its infrastructure. During a massive post-war economic boom, the city rapidly expanded outward. This led to the creation of the banlieue, these high-rise suburbs built on the fringes in the 50s and 60s. While they were meant to house a booming population, they effectively pushed the working class to the very outskirts. Over time, these areas became symbols of poverty and deep social divides that, as we know, continue to deeply impact modern Paris today.
And you know what? That fiery spirit of protest and tension is still woven right into the city's DNA. Just look at recent history. In May 1968, millions went on strike and barricades actually returned to the streets for social reform. In 2005, intense riots laid bare the painful divides in those suburban banlieues. In 2015, devastating terror attacks tested the absolute limits of the city's spirit. And then in 2019, the world collectively held its breath as the majestic Notre-Dame Cathedral caught fire. Through modern protests, tragedy, and literal flames, the fundamental spirit of this place remains impossible to silence. It simply refuses to be broken.
A city conquered, burned, occupied, and torn apart for 2,000 years. Yet it always rebuilds. It always survives. Having just hosted the 2024 Summer Olympics, showcasing its unmatched heritage on a global stage once more, we really have to ask, what will Paris build next? How will this immortal city reinvent itself for the next 1,000 years? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.